Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins in the hush of the world. After the War of Wrath had ended and Morgoth, the great enemy, was cast into the void, a strange calm settled upon the lands of Middle-earth. The stars hung heavy in the heavens, glinting like watchful eyes. The earth, scorched by wars long past, began to heal beneath the soft breath of time. Yet even in the cradle of peace, the seeds of shadow waited patiently in the loam of forgotten fears. Among the remnants of Morgoth's dark design lingered one of his most cunning servants, a being of cunning mind and terrible will, known in the elder days as Mírdain the Admirable. But in the tongue of men and elves, he would come to be known by another name, Sauron. He had not fled into the outer darkness as his master had, nor did he vanish into some forgotten corner of the world. Instead, he lingered quietly, thoughtfully, like a serpent coiled in the grass, watching the warm-blooded wanderers walk by with unseeing eyes. For Sauron was different from Morgoth in one important way. He still longed for order. Order, not destruction. Structure, not chaos. But his vision of order was not the kind that grew from trust or compassion. It was a heavy order, rigid and absolute, shaped by the will of one, his will. For a time he hid himself. The elves, weary from grief and proud in their wisdom, believed the great evils were behind them. They turned to the arts again, of music, of memory, of making. And Sauron, watching from the shadows, began to weave his new guise. Not as a tyrant, but as a benefactor. Not a destroyer, but a giver of gifts. He walked into the sunlight under a new name, Annatar, the Lord of Gifts. In this form, he bore beauty beyond the ken of mortal eyes. His hair shimmered like starlight on a river. His voice was as gentle as a harp string touched by moonlight. His words were wise, but laced with subtle seduction. To those who still remembered the days of fire and war, he seemed a balm, a bearer of peace. It was the elves of Eregion who welcomed him first, for they were craftsmen, lovers of beauty, and builders of bright things. And none among them was more skilled or more curious than Celebrimbor, grandson of Feanor, the mightiest smith who had ever lived. To celebrate, Annatar spoke of art that could preserve the world from decay. He spoke of crafting powers that could heal what was broken, that could ward against the slow dying of the light that all elves feared. And Celebrimbor listened. Together they worked in the great forges of where hammers sang and golden runes danced in the heat of the flame. Rings they made, fair and shining, infused with power to heal, to protect, to endure. The Rings of Power, they would later be called. And though Celebrimbor knew much, it was Annatar who taught him the secret fire, the deep lore that made the rings truly mighty. But Sauron Annatar kept one craft for himself alone. In the blackened land of Mordor, under the shadow of the smoking mountain, he forged in secret a master ring, into which he poured the greater part of his strength. A ring to command all others, one ring to rule them all. And so it was that the tale of the Second Age took a darker turn. For when Sauron placed the ring upon his finger, intending to bind the other rings and their bearers to his will, the elves perceived his treachery. they cast off their rings and hid them. Celebrimbor, heartbroken and furious, realized the terrible deceit. In that moment, the piece of Middle-earth fractured like glass beneath a hammer. Yet before the war began, there was still a breath, a trembling pause in the great unfolding. The wind stirred uneasily in the trees of Lindon, where Gil-galad ruled with stern wisdom. In the halls of Númenor, mighty men turned their gaze eastward, curious of what whispered in the shadows beyond the sea. But Sauron was not idle. He saw the elves' resistance, and he responded with fire. Eregion fell, its forges shattered, its streets blackened by war. Celebrimbor stood alone atop the tower of Ostin Edel. Defiant, he refused to reveal where the Three Elven Rings had been hidden, and for this he was captured, tormented, and slain. His lifeless form was used as a banner, a cruel message to the free peoples of Middle-earth. And from Mordor, Sauron's power surged like a rising tide. But the world would not yield so easily. The men of Númenor, those great mariners blessed by the valor with long life and wisdom, took heed of the growing darkness. Elendil, the tall, faithful among the faithful, spoke to his sons of a shadow returning. And in time, Sauron's reach would extend even to their distant island, setting in motion a tale of pride, of fall, and of ruin. But that is a story for another breath in the telling. For now, let the stars settle softly above the ruins of Aeon. Let the wind carry the last echo of hammer on anvil, the memory of light before the long shadow. And as you drift into sleep, remember, not all who offer gifts come with clean hands. The darkness, it seems, always knows the shape of longing, and it speaks in voices sweet as honey, soft as twilight, and cold as forgotten stone. It was said that the lands of Orion before their fall shimmered with a kind of golden dusk even under full daylight, a subtle veil that fell upon the trees and towers, not of shadow, but of memory, as though the very air remembered a time before the world grew weary. The stone of the streets was smooth and pale, flecked with veins of silver and blue, as if the bones of the land bore traces of starlight. And the forges, oh, the forges sang like living things. They pulsed with rhythm and heat, not with the anger of warcraft, but with the fervor of making, of shaping the world, not to dominate it, but to coax from it the beauty that slept within. It was in such a place that Celebrimbor lived, not merely as a craftsman, but as a poet of flame and ore, a philosopher whose tools were not only hammer and chisel, but thought, longing, and regret. His fingers, strong and scarred, bore the fine dust of gems, and his eyes held the shimmer of grief yet to be spoken aloud. He was of the house of Feanor, and though he rarely spoke of it, the legacy of that name trembled in his blood like a song half remembered, half feared. One evening, as the sun sank low beyond the misty mountains, casting long, melancholy shadows across the courtyards of Eregion, Celebrimbor stood upon a balcony carved of white stone, looking westward, where the sky bled red and orange into the encroaching dark. The wind was soft, but it carried with it the scent of forged smoke and distant pine, and something else, something faintly sweet, like old wine turned bitter. He was not alone. Annatar stood beside him, his face lit from beneath by the golden fire of the setting sun. and in that light he seemed almost transparent, like a dream given flesh. His voice, when it came, was gentle, like a reed stirred by water. "You are troubled, my friend," he said, and though the words were simple, there was in them a kind of tender intrusion, a careful breaking of silence that suggested intimacy rather than command. Celebrimbor did not answer at once. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon, where light and dark met in quiet struggle. When he finally spoke, his voice was slow and deliberate, as though each word had been carved from stone. "The beauty of the world is too brief," he said. "It fades faster than we can hold it, like a cup filled with starlight that spills the moment we lift it to our lips. I have spent my years preserving what can be preserved, songs and silver, memory and jewels. But even stone wears down beneath the tread of time. Even fire forgets how to burn." Annatar turned his eyes toward the same horizon, his expression unreadable. "You speak of impermanence as if it were a wound," he said. "But is it not also a gift? The fleeting nature of beauty gives it its poignancy, its preciousness. If all things lasted forever, would we value them as we do?" Celebrimbor laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. "Spoken like one who has never watched a friend die or a forest wither into ash. We elves, we do not die easily. It is true, but we are not untouched by loss. We remember everything. That is our gift and our burden." He turned then, looking at Annatar with eyes that glinted like steel beneath frost. "You promise preservation," he said. "A way to make this world endure, to hold its beauty still as one holds a leaf in amber. But even now I wonder, what is the cost of such preservation? What is the shape of the hand that holds the world still? Is it a hand that cherishes, or one that clutches?" Annatar's smile was soft, and he stepped forward, placing one hand lightly on the balustrade. The stone, touched by his palm, seemed to warm slightly, a faint glow spreading outward like breath on glass. "Must love and control always be at odds?" he asked. "Can one not hold a thing tightly and still revere it? A parent restrains a child from wandering into fire. A sculptor strikes stone to reveal the form within. Power is not always cruelty. Sometimes it is care. Sometimes it is clarity." The wind stirred again, cooler now, brushing Celebrimbor's cloak and carrying with it the scent of cold metal. He shivered, though not from chill. His voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. "You speak beautifully," he said. "Too beautifully. There is something behind your words, something I cannot see but feel, like a mirror that shows only what you wish me to behold." Annatar turned his gaze upon him fully then, and for the first time there was something unguarded in his face. Not vulnerability exactly, but something like sadness, deep and old and buried beneath many layers. "You see more than most," he said softly. "More than I would like. That is why I came to you, Celebrimbor, because you understand. Because you too carry a fire that burns brighter than reason. Because you have the courage to shape the world, not simply inherit it." The sun had slipped below the mountains now, and a hush fell over Eregion. The sky deepened into indigo, and stars began deepen. The torches along the outer walls flickered to life, and the forge fires visible in the distance pulsed like the slow, steady heartbeats of sleeping giants. Celebrimbor looked out once more, and something in his shoulders seemed to settle. "If what we build is to last," he said at last, "then it must be rooted in truth, not illusion, not domination. Let us make things that sing of life, not of fear." Annatar nodded, and his voice was as smooth as silk sliding over stone. "Then let us begin." But the stars, watching from above, did not move. They blinked, silent and cold, and perhaps, if one listened very carefully, sigh. For in the forge of friendship, sometimes it is the smallest crack that heralds the breaking of the whole. The night deepened, and the stars in their ancient procession wheeled silently above the lands of Eregion, pouring their cold silver upon the stone towers and leaf-laced arches of the elven city. The forge fires still glowed, but now their warmth seemed a distant echo of the sun's vanished heat, and the wind, once soft and fragrant, began to take on a sharper, more somber tone, as though it too had overheard the words spoken on the high balcony, and now whispered them to the darkened trees. The mountains in the east brooded in silhouette, their jagged crowns cutting into the velvet of the sky like black thorns, and the valleys below seemed to hold their breath, as though waiting for some unseen hand to stir the quiet surface of things. Celebrimbor did not sleep that night, nor did he return to his chambers of carved wood and woven light, where the ivy clung to the windows and the scent of fresh parchment lingered in the air. Instead, he walked the long colonnades of Edil, the great city of the jewelsmiths, where the moonlight fell in long strips across the white stone, and his footsteps echoed like distant bells in a vast and empty hall. The city was not truly empty, of course. The elves did not slumber as men did, and their lives moved in a rhythm of twilight labors and midnight songs. But in that hour all seemed hushed, as though the city itself had turned inward, listening to its own heartbeat. He passed beneath a great arch inscribed with runes older than the memory of most living things, and entered the Hall of Craft, where the forges of the Gwaith-i-Mírdain flickered in the stillness. The air was thick with the scent of metal and ash, and the embers still glowed in their beds of iron, breathing faint heat into the vast chamber. Shadows danced across the walls, shadows of tools, of helms half forged, of statues that stood with outstretched hands, as though offering something they themselves could not name. It was here that the great works had been wrought, the rings of healing, the amulets of light, the chains that bound wind to stone and song to silence. And it was here that the seeds of trust had been sown carefully with the tenderness of kinship and the blindness of hope. Annatar stood in the heart of that great hall, not at the forge itself, but at a stone table covered with diagrams and tablets. His head bent low, a strand of golden hair falling across his brow. He did not look up when Celebrimbor entered, nor did he speak at once, and the silence that hung between them was not empty, but filled with an unspoken intimacy, like the silence between two friends who have begun to wonder whether they truly know one another at all. At last, Celebrimbor spoke, his voice low and reflective like water moving beneath ice. "There is a question that haunts me, Annatar, though I have not dared to name it aloud. It has taken root in me slowly, like ivy creeping up the walls of an old house, and now I find it in every corner of my mind. I must ask it, though I fear the shape it may take when spoken." Annatar looked up, his expression unreadable, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. "Then ask it, my friend," he said, and his voice was calm, but beneath that calmness was a tension, like the still surface of a lake above a deep and roaring current. For truth, even when painful, is better than the sickness of doubt unspoken. Celebrimbor approached slowly, the hem of his robe whispering over the stone floor, and he rested his hand on the table's surface, where the blueprints of the ring still lay, unfurled, like the dreams of a world not yet born. He did not look at them. He looked at Annatar. "Why do you give us so much?" he asked. "Why do you speak of healing, of preservation, of unity, and yet never speak of your past? You tell us that you come from the West, that you were once a servant of the Valor. But your story is like a tapestry with the central image cut out, beautiful in its patterns, but hollow where it matters most. I have given you my trust, Annatar, and my art. But I begin to wonder if I have given you something more, something I did not mean to part with." There was a pause, long and brittle, and the only sound was the soft pop of embers cracking in their bed. Then Annatar stepped forward slowly, and his gaze, when it met Celebrimbor's, was shadowed with a strange sorrow. "I did not mean to deceive you," he said, "but there are truths that cut more deeply than lies. I was indeed a servant of the Valor long ago in the time before the sun was kindled. I was Myron then, a being of order and harmony, drawn to patterns, to symmetry, to the music of the world when it was still new and perfect. But the world fell," said Celebrimbor. "It fell into chaos and fire and blood. And I saw in the designs of the Valor not wisdom, but hesitation, not mercy, but stagnation. They let the world suffer rather than impose their will upon it. They called it freedom. I called it abandonment." He turned away then, his hands clasped behind his back, and his voice grew quieter, more intimate, as though he were speaking less to Celebrimbor and more to the silence that surrounded them. "I did not follow Morgoth for love of cruelty or thirst for destruction. I followed him because he acted, because he would remake the world rather than watch it rot. And when he fell, I saw that he too had erred. He sought domination through terror, and that is not order." His Annatar turned back, and there was a terrible beauty in his face now, something that shimmered on the edge between revelation and despair. "So I took another path. I returned in another form, not to conquer, but to guide. I chose a different mask, not to hide from truth, but to make it bearable. I offer you gifts, Celebrimbor taken by force. I wish to preserve this world, not because I love its flaws, but because I dream of what it could become. And I need your help, your fire, your purity of purpose." Celebrimbor stood in silence, the weight of those words pressing upon him like a mantle of iron. He did not speak for a long time, and the shadows shifted slowly across the floor as the forge fires dimmed, leaving only the dull red glow of coals beneath ash. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the high windows, as though the world itself stirred uneasily in its sleep. "I believe you mean what you say," Celebrimbor whispered. "And that is what frightens me." In the deep hours of the night, when even the stars seem to dim with weariness, and the world exhales in long, silent breaths, the halls of Eregion slumbered beneath a sky veiled in drifting mist. The city, usually vibrant with the quiet labors of the elves and the soft harmonies of their songs, now stood as still as a memory etched in stone. The moon hung pale and watchful above, its face like a forgotten coin of silver lost in the great vault of heaven, and its light filtered through high arched windows and delicate trellises, casting elongated patterns upon the marble floors, patterns that moved with the sighing wind like the fleeting remnants of dreams not yet fully departed. Within the forge halls, where once hammers rang in joyous rhythm and molten gold flowed like sunlit rivers, the air was now heavy with ash and old heat, the scent of iron and soot mingling with the faint, almost imperceptible fragrance of withered lurline blossoms from the courtyard beyond. The fire pits had burned low, their embers a dull, brooding red, pulsing faintly in the darkness like the hearts of sleeping dragons. The stones of the floor, once gleaming with polish, were now marked with the sea impressions of many footfalls, each one a silent witness to the birth of wonders and, perhaps unknowingly, to the forging of sorrow. It was here, among shadows, both literal and unseen, that Celebrimbor remained, unmoving, his hands resting on the edge of the worked, as though it alone kept him tethered to the earth. His gaze was distant, but not unfocused. Rather, it was the gaze of one whose thoughts have turned inward, diving through the depths of memory and doubt, turning over words like smooth river stones in the palm of the mind, searching for meaning in the shape of the silence between them. Annatar had withdrawn after their exchange, leaving the great hall without a word, as if to give space for the weight of his confession to settle. But that silence was not empty. It thrummed like the taut string of a harp before the pluck, and within it lingered the echo of his voice, mournful, persuasive, beautiful and terrible all at once. Celebrimbor had known many things in his life, joy and grief, triumph and despair, but now he found himself standing at a crossroads, not of action, but of belief. The truths Annatar had spoken were like twined blades shimmering with wisdom, yet capable of cutting through the very soul of certainty. For what does one do, he wondered, when evil cloaks itself in the garments of empathy? When the hand that offers peace trembles with regret, not malice? When a fallen spirit does not demand submission, but seeks partnership in creation? And the city in its dreaming stillness seemed to ponder with him. The walls, once ringing with purpose, now loomed like ancient sentinels listening. The ivy on the windows stirred gently as though caressed by a sigh too soft for mortal ears. Somewhere far above, a nightingale began to sing, a slow, melancholy note that rose like incense into the vaulted ceiling, where it dissolved into the hush like a prayer offered to the silence. The song stirred something in Celebrimbor, and he whispered aloud, not to the bird nor to any god, but to the air itself. "I fear I have built with hands not wholly my own," he murmured, "that in seeking to preserve what I love, I may have bound it with chains forged of good intention and quiet despair." And then, soft as a breeze through autumn leaves, another voice answered. "You speak of chains," came the voice of Annatar, reappearing at the edge of the chamber, half veiled in shadow. "But not all bindings are cruel. A ring binds finger to gold, yes, but it also joins heart to hope, will to destiny. Is it not better to craft something that can withstand time's decay, rather than leave the world to wither beneath the slow erosion of chaos?" He stepped forward, and the light caught his face, rendering it half in gold and half in shadow, an image not unlike the soul he had laid bare hours before. "You see the past and fear it will repeat," he continued. "And perhaps you are right. But the past is not a shackle unless we allow it to be. What we have forged together, these rings, they are not instruments of conquest. They are vessels of potential. They amplify, yes, but only what is already within. They do not change, they reveal. Celebrimbor turned to face him fully now, his eyes bright with unshed grief, with the burden of lineage and legacy, with the gnawing fear that history was not a path, but a circle. And what he asked, voice trembling like a string on the verge of snapping, "Will the one reveal when it is placed upon your finger?" You speak of balance and intention, but in every word I hear a hunger cloaked in reason, a desire to perfect the world. Yes, but in whose image, in whose will you speak of order? But I wonder, do you mean harmony or dominion? And was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, it was not in defense nor in anger, but with a quiet solemnity, as though acknowledging a wound long hidden. "I do not deny that I am drawn to control," he said. "I see a world in pain, and I would soothe it, not with soft words alone, but with a structure that cannot be shaken." The Valor watched Arda fracture and did nothing. "I would not make their mistake. Yes, my will is strong. Yes, I seek unity. But tell me, Celebrimbor, if you could end all sorrow, even by force, would you not do it? Is the will to heal not worth the cost of bending the unruly to peace?" A gust of wind surged through the open arches, then scattering ash across the floor, whirling it into shapes like fleeing ghosts. The firelight flickered, casting strange, dancing shadows upon the walls, and the nightingale song ceased, leaving behind a silence too deep for comfort. And Celebrimbor, standing there amidst the cold stone and fading embers, felt something old awaken in his heart. Not rage nor certainty, but a sadness so profound it seemed to echo down the bones of his ancestors. "I do not know," he said at last. "Perhaps that is what terrifies me most." Dawn came slowly to Archon, not with triumphant fanfare, but with a quiet unfurling of color across the sky, a soft bleeding of rose and gold into the pale mists that clung stubbornly to the earth. The city stirred beneath this tentative light, as if waking from a dream that had grown too heavy, too tangled in memory to be cast aside all at once. The towers caught the sun's first breath like silent watchmen, blinking away the shadows of long contemplation, and the trees that lined the marble roads stood unmoving, each leaf beaded with dew, glinting like glass tears in the hush that follows a sleepless night. The river, silvered by morning, moved slow and solemn, mirroring the pale sky as though reluctant to commit to the day, and in its murmurs there was a cadence of waiting, of questions unanswered, and paths not yet chosen. Celebrimbor stood upon a narrow bridge carved from white stone veined with pale blue quartz. His hands resting lightly upon the railing, his face turned eastward toward the hills that cradled the rising sun. His cloak, unfastened, stirred gently in the wind, though his figure remained as still as the statues of his forebears that lined the walkways beyond. Figures wrought with such care they seemed to live even in their stillness, guardians of memory and legacy. There was a hollowness in his chest that the fresh air could not fill, a sense of dislocation, as though some essential anchor had slipped quietly from its mooring, leaving him to drift between what he had believed and what he now feared to be true. The light touched his features with tentative warmth, but there was no warmth in his heart, only the lingering ache of questions that had no clear answer, and the echo of Annatar's voice repeating itself in the chambers of his mind, words carved in honey and shadow, each syllable a gentle knife. He heard footsteps approach behind him, soft as the descent of leaves. He did not turn, for he already knew who it was. Annatar's presence was like the rising of a tide, inevitable, measured, and vast, pressing against the soul rather than the senses. For a while neither spoke. The silence between them stretched, not tense, but contemplative, like a pause in music, where one listens for a note that may never come. At last it was Annatar who broke the stillness, his voice lower now, subdued as though weighted by the same thoughts that burdened Celebrimbor's heart. "There is a grief that settles over those who create," he said. "A silent despair that comes not from failure, but from the knowledge that no creation is immune to time. You shape wonders, and yet the winds erode them. You forge beauty, and still the world forgets. What is the purpose of such endless labor, if all that we build is devoured by the slow hunger of ages?" Celebrimbor's fingers curled around the stone rail, and when he spoke, it was with a trembling composure, a voice shaped not only by reason, but by a heart that had watched too many sunsets pass without promise. "There was a time," he said, "when I believed that beauty was its own answer, that to make something fine, even if fleeting, was a way to honor the world, that the act of creation was itself a form of defiance against death. But now I see that even the finest jewel, even the most perfect melody, cannot stand against the will of those who would twist it. And I wonder, have I created things that will serve the light, or become instruments of its undoing?" Annatar stepped beside him, his gaze following Celebrimbor into the east, where the sun's light bled gold into the hills like ink into water. "You have given the world a chance to endure," he said softly. "And in doing so, you have stepped beyond the role of craftsman. You are no longer merely a maker of things. You are a shaper of fates. And that, my friend, is a burden that few can carry without bending beneath it." Celebrimbor turned to him then, his eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in sorrow, like the tightening of string drawn taut across a harp, each note held in painful tension. "And you," he asked, "do you carry it without bending? Or have you merely changed the shape of your burden so that it appears like strength?" Annatar did not flinch, but neither did he smile. His eyes, often so radiant, seemed to darken, not with malice, but with something far more complex, something that looked almost like shame. "I have bent," he admitted, "and in bending I have learned to wield my sorrow like a blade. I do not seek peace because I am at peace. I seek it because I remember what the world looked like when there was none. I remember the screams in the dark, the cities drowned in blood, the light extinguished in the eyes of children not yet grown. I remember, and I cannot bear to remember again." The wind passed over them then, curling around the stones of the bridge and stirring the surface of the river far below. It carried the scent of heather and smoke, of the lingering heat from the forge fires and the cold breath of mountains beyond. The sound it made was like weeping, a subtle, spectral song that neither confirmed nor denied the words they shared. Celebrimbor looked once more toward the horizon, and for a moment he seemed very far away, as though his thoughts had taken him to places no road could lead. "There is something in me that wants to believe you," he said, "that sees in you not the shadow of Morgoth, but the glimmer of Mírdain, that spirit of flame and form who once loved order not for power, but for beauty. But the One Ring, I have felt its pull even through distance and design. I have not seen it with my eyes, but I know it was made, and I know it was made apart from us." Annatar did not deny it. He stood silent, and his silent silence was its own kind of confession, heavy and immutable. "You meant to master the others," Celebrimbor whispered. "You meant to bind us not with chains of iron, but with chains of purpose, of thought, of will. You meant to be the quiet voice in every mind, the unspoken law beneath every decision. You would govern us not by decree, but by the gentle weight of inevitability." Annatar closed his eyes, and the golden light of the dawn painted his face in sorrow and flame. "Yes," he said, "because I feared what we would become without guidance. Because I believed that freedom left unchecked would lead not to joy, but to ruin. Because I wanted to protect you from yourselves." The river moved on beneath them, slow and unyielding, carving its way through stone and time. It did not pause for sorrow, nor bend for regret. It carried all things forward, whether they would or no. Celebrimbor stepped back from the railing, his hands falling to his sides, his voice quiet but resolute. "Then you do not understand us at all. To live, even in sorrow, is better than to be ruled without knowing. To choose even poorly is better than to be shaped by unseen hands. You call it order, I call it death." And with that he turned away, leaving Annatar alone on the bridge, surrounded by the soft light of a new day that felt less like a beginning and more like the calm before an inevitable storm. The days that followed were heavy with the silence of things unsaid, a silence that thickened the air in like morning fog in the hollows of a forgotten valley, wrapping around towers and doorways, slipping beneath the eaves of the forges, and settling into the stone with the quiet patience of regret. The elves, though immortal and long-suffering, were not immune to the subtle tremors of dissonance, and they moved now with a restraint that had not been there before, as if the very halls had begun to murmur secrets into their pointed ears. And the wind which once sang through their high windows in joyful harmonies now carried with it a warning note, faint, discordant, but growing stronger with each passing hour. Even the forges, those mighty hearts of Austen-Indil, began to beat more slowly, their flames less eager, their voices less jubilant. The hammers still fell, but their rhythm no longer danced, no longer told stories in their ringing tones. Instead, they struck with a measured hesitance, as if questioning the hands that wielded them. The walls, once bright with banners and carvings of green trees and bright stars, seemed to recede into the dimness, their grandeur dulled beneath the weight of an unseen cloud. And among all this stillness, Celebrimbor walked as a man half-turned to shadow, his steps echoing in empty corridors, his thoughts deep and tangled like the roots of ancient forests that burrow endlessly beneath the hills. He sat alone often now in the chamber where the three rings had been hidden away. Not touched, not worn, not wielded, but watched over like slumbering spirits, delicate and potent, coiled like serpents of fire and starlight within their silver-lined caskets. They were beautiful, almost unbearably so. Narya, the ring of flame, its heart like a living ember suspended in time. Nenya, the ring of water, its band of Mithil, cold as moonlight, its gem like a shard of frozen starlight caught mid-fall. And Vilya, the ring of air, whose sapphire burned with a calm, steady brilliance like the sky before a storm. Celebrimbor had made them after Annatar's departure. Made them in secret. Made them with a hand driven by purity, by hope, by something that ached to remain untainted by deceit. And yet the echo of the forging of the One was there, faint but undeniable, like a distant thunder in clear weather, a sound you could pretend did not exist. If you were afraid to look at the horizon, it was in this chamber, dimly lit by crystal lanterns whose light flickered like memories, that Eland came to him. Eland, half-elven, young in appearance though ancient in blood, his eyes bearing the quiet strength of many sorrows, his presence always a kind of calm, as if he carried within him a piece of the silence that follows the ending of songs. "You are weary," Elrond said after a long moment of quiet, standing just beyond the circle of lantern light, "and you have not spoken of what troubles you. Not truly, not to any of us." Celebrimbor looked up, and for a long time he did not reply. When he did, his voice was roughened by sleeplessness and the erosion of certainty. "How does one speak of doubt," he asked, "when it hides itself in the shape of wisdom? How does one condemn a gift when it comes wrapped in beauty, when it sings the songs of healing and unity? I look upon what we have wrought, and I see splendor. But I feel the edge of a blade beneath the gold. I fear we have made something that reflects not only the light of the world, but its longing, its desperation. And that is a dangerous mirror." Elder Eland stepped closer, and the light touched his face, revealing lines carved by grief too vast for mortal hearts. "There is no creation untouched by its maker's spirit," he said, "and no spirit, however noble, is free from sorrow or shadow. But it is not the presence of darkness that defines a thing. It is how we guard against its hunger. You forged these rings not to rule, but to preserve. That is their nature. And if Sauron, if Annatar crafted another with darker purpose, then it is not your failure, but his." Celebrimbor rose slowly, his fingers brushing the casket of Nenya, as if to assure himself that it remained real, untouched. "And yet I did not stop him," he said. "I welcomed him. I learned from him. I shared with him the secrets of our craft, and I did so not blindly, but with hope. That is what I cannot forgive. Not the mistake, but the hope. Because hope, when betrayed, becomes a poison more bitter than despair." He moved to the window then, looking out over the city. The morning had advanced, but the light remained pale, subdued, as though the sun itself had dimmed to watch what unfolded in these quiet streets. The people of Eregion moved like figures in a tapestry, graceful, slow, purposeful, but there was tension in their posture, a growing awareness that something had shifted, that the harmony of their days had been subtly broken, and that the music, though still playing, had lost its key. Elrond joined him, standing in silence for a long time before speaking. "What will you do?" he asked softly. "I do not know," Celebrimbor whispered. "Part of me wishes to destroy them, to unmake the rings before they can be touched by the shadow that now reaches toward them. But part of me still believes they might be a light against the dark, that they might yet sing a different song." Aaron's voice was gentle but steady. "Then hide them far from his reach, and trust not the fire of vengeance, nor the lure of certainty. Give them to hands that will guard them, not wield them, and let their power be not in dominion, but in silence, in the quiet resistance that endures, not through force, but through hope." Silicor looked at him, and in his eyes was a sorrow too old for tears. "You speak of trust," he said. "And yet what trust remains in a world where even beauty can be a trap, where even gifts are laced with chains?" And Eland answered, "Then trust not the world, nor even yourself. Trust only in the choice to do what must be done, without hope of reward or certainty of outcome. That, too, is a kind of faith." And the wind outside, stirring the leaves of the trees with long, wandering fingers, seemed to pause for a moment, as though in solemn agreement. The sky above Eregion had grown pale and strained, washed not with the luminous silver of moonlight, nor the vibrant gold of sun, but with a wan, colorless light that seemed neither day nor night, a kind of liminal hush that settled upon the land like a shroud of breathless stillness before a great storm. The trees, which had once rustled with the music of their own, now stood as motionless sentinels, their leaves dulled, their boughs heavy with a silence that was more than absence of sound. It was the presence of something unsaid, something unformed, yet deeply felt, like the weight of a truth not yet spoken. The wind that crept through the hills no longer danced, but whispered low, persistent, urgent, as if it carried warnings too ancient for words, murmuring them into the stone and earth in the secret tongue of the world itself. Within the central hall of Ostenede, the great gathering place of the Gardain, the lamps had not been lit. Celebrimbor sat alone upon the steps that once led to a dais where songs of welcome were sung, where riddles had been exchanged and laughter flowed like water. Now those shadows pulled in the corners, curling like smoke beneath the carved arches, and the silence clung to the walls like old dust. It was a place made for light and voice, and it ached in their absence. He held nothing in his hands, no tool nor token, but his fingers moved as if shaping something unseen, a habit of a craftsman too long at his art, or perhaps a sign of one trying to feel creation in a world that now only whispered of dissolution. His eyes, once bright with the inner fire of discovery and the hunger of making, were now clouded, not dimmed by age, for elves do not age as men do, but by a heaviness that comes when faith long cherished begins to crack. When the doors at the far end opened, it was not with ceremony nor command, but with a soft creak of age and the sigh of worn hinges. And there, framed by the failing light, stood Annatar, his form still fair, still clad in the raiment of wisdom and light, but the glow that once danced about him had dulled, not with time, but with revelation. He no longer approached as a guest, nor a teacher, but as one who returns to a place where the mask has fallen, and where every step is measured, not in distance, but in trust lost. For a time neither spoke, and even the air between them seemed reluctant to move. Then Annatar, voiced low and slow as though climbing out of some deep inner chasm, broke the quiet. "There was a time," he said, "when I believed that harmony could be imposed, that the discord of the world, the wildness of choice, and the cruelty of time could be silenced like a storm beneath a dome of iron, that if one shaped the pattern tightly enough, bent the lines just so, the world would cease to bleed, and pain would have no more voice." He stepped forward, his feet echoing on the stone like the memory of a heartbeat. "But now I see that even the most perfect design cracks when life moves through it. That the world is not a thing to be sculpted and sealed, but a fire that breathes in darkness and light both. I thought I could guide that fire. I thought I could tame it. But fire does not yield. It transforms, Celebrimbor lifted his eyes, and there was no hatred in them, only an old, tired grief that seemed to look past Annatar's face into something far beyond. His voice, when it came, was like the wind that stirred fallen leaves, soft, restless, and steeped in memory. "And what will you do now?" he asked. "Now that the fire has burned your hand, will you still seek to hold it, to shape it into a lantern and force it to shine only where you command? Or will you let it burn free and accept that you cannot unmake the world's sorrow with rings and will and whispers?" Annatar said nothing for a moment, and in the quiet that followed, the wind outside rose and pressed against the great windows, howling with a sound like the weeping of distant voices. Then finally he spoke, not with the voice of the seducer or the teacher, but with the naked tone of one who stands upon the edge of ruin and sees his reflection in the abyss. "I do not know," he said. "What I have become is bound to what I once was, and I can no longer tell which thread began the weaving. I came to Middle East with the fire of purpose, with the belief that I could heal what Morgoth broke. But I became enamored with my own design, with the elegance of control, until I mistook it for truth. I see that now, and yet I cannot let go. Not entirely, not yet." The light in the hall dimmed further as clouds gathered outside like cloaks of mourning. Celebrimbor rose slowly, his gaze locked to Annatar's, and for a long moment it seemed as though time itself had narrowed to this space, this breath between two hearts that once walked together, but now stood on opposite shores. "I forgave you once," Celebrimbor said quietly, "not in words, but in action. I gave you my trust because I believed that even fallen stars could still burn with purpose. But now I see that your light, however fair, was never meant to warm, only to blind. You gave us gifts, yes, but those gifts bore your mark. They were never free." Another stepped closer, but not too close. There was something in his posture now, not humility, but restraint, like a blade that chooses not to strike, though it hungers to move. "Then tell me," he said softly, "is it too late to undo what has been done?" Celebrimbor looked at him for a long time, and in that gaze was the weight of every ring forged, every word spoken in hope, every silence shared in secret doubt. "I do not know," he answered, his voice barely above a breath, "but I fear that question may no longer belong to us." And above them the wind found its voice again, not as a whisper this time, but as a cry that curled around the spires of the city and echoed into the vast, uncertain dark beyond. The storm did not come all at once, as in the tales of wrathful skies and sudden cataclysm. It came slowly as a shadow gathering in the corners of a once bright chamber, as a distant hum becoming a roar over time, as a hush in the soul before the soul breaks. In the high towers of Austin Edel, where once lanterns burned with blue fire, and the scent of lavender and silverwood drifted through the carved colonnades, the air had grown cold and bitter, not merely with the approach of winter, but with a taste of betrayal, and the hallways seemed longer now, the light more fleeting, as though the city itself recoiled from what it now knew of itself, as though stone, bone, and leaf alike had become unwilling accomplices in the tale that had unfolded within their bounds. The people, those radiant craftsmen and weavers of light and knowledge, had begun to whisper. Not openly, for elves are not given to panic, nor do they gossip like men do, but in quiet glances, in the subtle slowing of steps when passing the great forge hall, in the questions that hung in the eyes of apprentices who once studied with joy, but now hesitated at the threshold of creation, as though every new thing they shaped might be tainted with a purpose not their own. The very tone of the air had shifted. The music of the place had grown sparse, and the wind that once carried the laughter of the Mírdain now pulled at cloaks and braids like a mourner in need of comfort. Celebrimbor stood upon the great eastern wall, overlooking the wild lands that stretched toward the mountains, lands that had once felt distant, a far shore of stone and smoke where few dared wander. But now Mordor loomed not just in geography, but in thought. The name whispered itself like a cold breath through his mind, accompanied always by that other name. Annatar, no longer fair, no longer masked, but Sauron revealed, the Lord of Gifts, unmasked as the Lord of the Ring. His hands, gloved against the chill, rested on the stone parapet, but he did not feel its roughness. He saw only the horizon where clouds hung low like the bellies of Gijay beasts bloated with thunder and darkness, and the sky wept in narrow slants of rain too far to touch, yet close enough to feel. And though the wind tugged at his robes and spoke in his ears with the voice of old forests and older fears, he heard only the echo of that final conversation, that final truth which had shattered the bond he once held so dear. Behind him came the soft footsteps of Eland, and they did not break the silence, but rather joined it like a harmony woven beneath a melody too old to forget. "You have sent the three away," Elrond said, though it was not a question. His voice was low and steady, like the deep current of a river that cuts through stone, not with rage, but with patient purpose. "I had no choice," Celebrimbor replied, and his voice was hollow, but not empty. It carried within it the weight of grief, honed into purpose, of love refined into resolve. They must be beyond his reach. If he cannot possess them, he cannot bend them. If he cannot touch them, he cannot corrupt them. Elrond came to stand beside him. His eyes also turned to the east, and for a time they stood without speaking. Then he asked, "And the others?" Smur's eyes narrowed slightly, the wind tossing strands of his hair across his brow. "The lesser rings remain. He took them, or he will. He sent emissaries, monstrous things cloaked in fair skin to reclaim what he considers his rings of flame, of shadow, of hunger disguised as gift. And the kings of men, they will take them. They will think themselves blessed, and they will not understand. Not until the metal has etched itself into their bones. Not until their souls are no longer their own." There was a silence after that, broken only by the wind, which rose in gusts and scattered leaves across the stone like pages of an unfinished tale. Then Elrond spoke again, his voice softer still. "You blame yourself?" "I do," Celebrimbor said simply, "for I am to blame." He turned now, facing Elend, his face drawn, eyes rimmed with sleepless nights and sorrow unspent. "I opened the door. I invited him in, not by ignorance, but by hope. That is what wounds me most deeply. Not that I was deceived, but that I longed to believe him. That in all my wisdom, all my craft, I still sought a voice to echo mine, a mind to match mine in fire and clarity. I found it in him, and that fire has consumed us both." Elrond placed a hand on his arm, gentle but firm. "You are not alone in your longing. Even the wisest fall prey to hope. And even in this, especially in this, you have shown more courage than most would ever dream of. You faced him not as a warrior faces an enemy, but as a brother faces betrayal. And still you stood, Celimbor's breath caught, not from cold, but from the sudden ache of hearing at last a truth that did not accuse. He looked away, back to the east, where the shadow gathered thick like the breath of some slumbering beast. "You will come," he said, "not as Annatar, but as Sauron unveiled. And he will not ask this time, he will take." Elrond nodded, his gaze darkening. "Then we must be ready." Celebrimbor closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, they were not empty, but filled with something clearer, harder. Not vengeance, but purpose. "Then the city must be warned, the people prepared." The forges turned not to art, but to arms. The sky gave a low growl of thunder, distant but insistent, and the wind, once playful, now tore at the banners atop the towers like a herald of doom. And so it came, not like a wave of sudden fire, nor with the clamorous thunder of breaking sky, but as a slow, inexorable unraveling, like the thread of a great tapestry pulled quietly from its edge, unnoticed until the shape of the world itself began to distort. The winds from the east, once merely cold and swift, now carried with them the scent of iron and ash, of something burned long ago but never forgotten, of old wounds reopened and made raw again. The mountains beyond the plain, black against a bruised sky, seemed to swell in stature, looming not by distance alone, but by presence, as if Mordor itself had stretched out a hand unseen, its fingers long and grasping, casting a shadow not of light obstructed, but of will imposed. And in the forests at the edges of the world, birds flew in patterns that did not follow the wind, and even the rivers began to slow, as if the water too had begun to listen for footsteps approaching from the dark. Within the white-walled city of Ostin-Edel, the last of the songs had faded. The forges now roared, not with joy, but with urgency. Their flames no longer danced. They howled as if they too knew what was coming and did not wish to be part of it. Hammers rang like warning bells, shaping swords and armor with relentless rhythm, and the once delicate hands of the Gwaith-i-Mírdain were now calloused and stained with soot. Their grace turned toward grim necessity. No longer did the lamps shine with soft hues of sapphire and pearl. Now they burned a constant fierce gold, chasing back the deepening gloom with defiance rather than welcome. Celebrimbor stood at the center of it all, a figure more statue than living flesh, now his face gaunt with sleepless nights and a heart burdened with too many choices, none of them clean. His voice, when it rang out, no longer carried the lilt of wonder, but the iron edge of command. He was a smith no longer, but a steward of the final hour, and as he walked through the streets, he had helped shape beneath archways he had carved with joy. He touched nothing, for fear that even his fingers might now bring sorrow. He had sent the three into hiding, entrusted them to those beyond the reach of shadow, and in so doing had severed the last living thread between what he had hoped to preserve and what he must now defend. It was in the great tower, beneath the dome, where the stars had once been painted in silver leaf, now dulled and peeling with the slow corrosion of despair, that he met Annatar for the last time. But Annatar was no longer Annatar, and though his face was still fair, It bore now the stillness of a mask long worn, no longer a disguise, but a truth revealed through repetition. Sauron stood in the hall like a wound that would not close, and the very air around him seemed thinner, harder to breathe, as though the world itself resisted his presence but could not cast him out. They stood in silence for a long moment. Two creators, two visionaries, two brothers in fire, now turned strangers in ash. "It did not have to end this way," Sauron said at last, and his voice, though calm, carried with it a hollow echo like a harp with broken strings. "You could have joined me still. Even now, with all that is past, there is room for unity. We are not so different, you and I. We both seek to preserve, to build, to shape the world into something better. Why throw that away for pride?" Celebrimbor looked at him, and for a moment something in his face softened, not in forgiveness, but in mourning. "You still do not see," he replied, and his voice was quiet but steady, like the last candle that refuses to go out, even when the wind grows wild. "You speak of unity, but you mean obedience. You speak of preservation, but you mean control. What you build, you do not love, you fear. You bind the world, not to hold it close, but to stop it from moving. And in doing so, you kill what you claim to save." Sauron's expression did not change, but something in his eyes grew colder. "You believe your defiance noble, but it is merely waste. I offered peace, you gave me war, and now you will have its price." Celebrimbor stepped forward slowly, as if each footfall measured the weight of every ring forged, every trust broken. Peace offered by one who hides a whip behind his back is not peace. It is silence. And silence bought with fear is not unity. It is the death of song. The storm that had long circled now broke upon the city like a scream. The sky shattered into rain and flame, and the armies of Mordor swept across the land like ink spilled upon parchment, devouring fields and forest alike. Fire fell from the heavens, and the air split with the sound of earth weeping beneath the tread of monstrous things. The walls of Eregion held, but only for a time, and in the heart of the forged tower, Celebrimbor stood, blade in hand, surrounded by the dead and dying. And still he fought, not for victory, but for memory, for the idea that somewhere beyond the ash and ruin, the light of the three might still burn untainted. In the end, they took him not with swords, but with chains. And still he did not yield. And in his death, though brutal and unspeakable, there was no cry of defeat. Only silence. Profound, endless silence. Like the final ring of a hammer laid down for the last time. And far away, beyond shadow and ruin, the three waited, guarded, hidden, glimmering still in secret places, like the last breath of spring buried beneath winter's snow. And Sauron, crowned in fire and silence, looked upon what he had won and found it hollow. For the one could rule the others, but never possess what was freely given in love, nor touch what had been born of hope, nor destroy the memory of a city built not of stone and steel, but of light and song. And so the Second Age waned, its glory dimmed, and its sorrow deepened. But even in darkness, some lights do not die. They endure.